Now, the real heart of opposition to same-sex marriage is that it means same-sex parenting. And same-sex parenting means that a child is forced to miss out on a mother or a father. That's because marriage is a compound right. Under Article 16 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the right to marry and to form a family. Therefore, same-sex marriage includes the right to form a family by adoption or artificial reproduction. And yet any child of that marriage must miss out on either a mother or a father. That is the injustice. Of course, there are already tragic situations where a child cannot have both a mum and a dad, such as the death or desertion of a parent, but that's not a situation you'd ever wish upon a child. And it's not a situation that government should impose on a child. Legalising same-sex marriage will institute the motherless family or the fatherless family. It will inflict that deprivation on those children, the motherless or fatherless generation. As ethicist Professor Margaret Somerville has written, demands for same-sex marriage, quote, force us to choose between giving priority to children's rights or to homosexual adults' claims, end quote. We have to choose. Now, many people say they can't imagine any harm to society from same-sex marriage, but the serious minds behind the movement do let us glimpse their purpose. US activist Michelangelo Signorile urges gays, quote, to fight for same-sex marriage and its benefits, and then, once granted, redefine the institution of marriage completely, end quote. He sees same-sex marriage as, quote, the final tool with which to get education about homosexuality into public schools. And sure enough, we now have empirical evidence that normalising gay marriage in law means normalising homosexual behaviour in the curriculum. Following the November 2003 court decision in Massachusetts to legalise gay marriage, school libraries were required to stock same-sex literature. Primary children were given homosexual fairy stories such as King and King. Some high school students were even given an explicit manual of homosexual advocacy entitled Queer in the 21st Century. Education will have to comply with the new normal. Now, beyond the confusion and corruption of school children, the cultural consequences of legalising same-sex marriage include the stifling of conscientious and religious freedoms. Again in Massachusetts, when the adoption agency Catholic Charities was told it would now have to place children equally with homosexual married couples, it had to close. As Canadian lawyer and lesbian activist Barbara Finlay said, quote, the legal struggle for queer rights will one day be a showdown between religious freedom and sexual orientation. Be sure, the main game behind homosexual marriage is not to give a sense of social acceptance to troubled same-sex couples, it is to complete the sexual revolution. White-anting the bourgeois, heteronormative, patriarchal structure of marriage and family, radicalising the child's sense of sexual right and wrong, and suppressing religious teaching with the full weight of anti-discrimination law. If ever there was a marauding wolf threatening the flock, desecrating the human trinity of mother, father, child, this is it. David Blankenhorn warned, quote, once this proposed reform becomes law, even to say the words out loud in public, every child needs a mother and a father, would probably be viewed as explicitly divisive and discriminatory, possibly even as hate speech, end quote. Well, our political leaders must continue to say these words out loud because they are bedrock sanity, and must accept that the deep things of nature are beyond the authority of any political party to tamper with. Marriage is not a fad to be cut to shape according to political whim. The father of modern anthropology, Claude Lévi-Strauss, called marriage, quote, a social institution with a biological foundation, end quote. Marriage, throughout history, is society's effort to reinforce this biological reality. Male, female, offspring. All of our ceremonies, even Christian ceremonies, and all of our laws exist to buttress nature, helping bind a feral by nature male to his mate, and both of them to any child they might create. Now, not all marriages do create children, but typically they do, and the institution exists for the typical case of marriage. Homosexual relations obviously cannot create children and cannot provide a child, whether one's own offspring or an adopted child, cannot provide that child with a mother and a father, which is the essential purpose of marriage. Such relations are important to the individuals involved, and they demand neighbourly civility, but they do not meet nature's job description for marriage.
You seem to mention the issue of children a lot as one of the key reasons why we would say that same-sex marriage is an unhealthy development. What about the argument that says, well, as long as children are loved, whether it's two men or two women or whatever, isn't love the highest value, and isn't that the key? And as long as children are loved, that's surely the thing we're after.
Yeah, love's important, but no matter how loving a pair of lesbian parents are, neither of them can be a dad to a little boy. And there's something special about a dad for a little boy or a dad for a little girl. There are qualities of the relationship between a boy and his mum that nothing can replace. Nothing. No amount of caring from a bloke's boyfriend can be the same as your mother. And if anyone doesn't see that, I'm afraid I can't argue into seeing, I can't persuade you to see it. I just regret that you're so blind to something so primal, so profound. So it's not about neutral love. Look, if the slogan is that it's all about love and commitment and marriage isn't about making babies, that's fine. But quite seriously, be rational about it. If it's only about love and commitment, you show me any rational principle why I should not be able to have a marriage of three people that I love, three people that I am committed to. Whether it's me and two women, whether it's three men, they love each other, they are committed, they want to share their lives, and they want the social honour of calling that marriage, because our love is as good as your love. Love knows no limits. So there's problems with mushing it down into sentiment when it's actually biology.
And this seems to me to raise another issue on same-sex marriage. I don't believe it's true that same-sex marriage leads to, for instance, polygamy. But would you agree that same-sex marriage seems to remove any principled argument against polygamy or other forms of relationships demanding the same recognition? After all, if marriage is plasticine and can be shaped to meet the desires of one group of people, why not for another group? Would that be a reasonable?
Absolutely, and there's a fellow, Brennan, who is the chair of the British Bar Association, top lawyer, and he pointed out a couple of years ago, if we remove the requirement of different gender, how can you insist on a certain number? That's the point. The logic just disappears. Unless marriage is fortifying a natural given that is there in nature with all our mammals, and we are simply fortifying it socially and culturally, that's one thing. If you're going to turn it into a narcissistic, subjective adult romance is the only criterion, then there is no law, there's no legal principle why you can't not only have polygamy, as in the Muslim model, but you can also have or what they call polyamory, which is a serious academic school of thought, multiple same-sex partners or multiple mixed-sex partners. That is a logical implication. There's no denying it. We're not saying it's coming next year, but it'll come in due course because it has to, logically.
None of us want to discriminate against people. We don't want to marginalise people. Can you speak to that?
That is vital, James. And this is really important. If you remember one thing from this last point of the discussion, remember this, that in Australia there is no discrimination against same-sex couples in any form, other than that they can't marry because it's impossible. In 2008, a bipartisan majority of federal parliament changed 85 laws to get rid of any discrimination against same-sex couples whatsoever. In Medicare, in taxation, in superannuation, in whatever you like, it's gone. Under Australian law, a same-sex couple is a de facto couple with exactly the same status as, for example, our former first couple, Gillard and Macpherson. They have exactly the same status in law, the same rights, the same responsibilities, the same whatever you like. So there is no difference. But all I'd say is that by treating same-sex couples and man-woman couples the same under law doesn't mean that they're the same. I would say celebrate the difference of man-woman couple, because remember, only a man and a woman can create a new life, and only a man and woman can give a child, whether their own or whether an adopted child, a mother and a father. And that is the heart and soul of why we have marriage. If I could give one quote to my atheist example, the old philosopher Bertrand Russell, he wrote a book called Marriage and Morals in 1929, and he had more sense than today's activists. He said, quote, "It is through children alone that sexual relations become of importance to society and worthy of being taken cognizance of by a legal institution," end quote. Got it? The only reason marriage exists as an institution is because males and female mammals make offspring, and you've got to regulate it or else have chaos.
Let me paraphrase what you've just said. So the government has no right to interfere with my sexual activity at all, except that where it creates a child, now the government has a responsibility to ensure that that is done with responsibility and care for the child. So that's the
Quite
criteria
correct.
why government gets involved in heterosexual marriage, whereas a gay couple should be none of the government's business.
None of the business, and I don't know why self-respecting gay couples would be so patronised as to let government give them a certificate about their relationship. Why don't they have the pride to say, go to hell, this is our relationship, we love each other, we're living together, go to hell. We don't need your stamp of approval, we don't need your government licence, we don't need your marriage, leave that to the breeders, as they call us, the breeders.
Dr. David, we've had a question. Is same-sex marriage equivalent to allowing single women to become pregnant by IVF? So we've talked about, well, if there's no father figure, what's the difference?
Very good point. I would say the same offence is committed by different ways of depriving a child of its birthright. Its birthright is a mother and a father, and there are different ways of depriving a child of that birthright. Same-sex marriage is one because it guarantees same-sex adoption and it guarantees same-sex surrogacy or IVF. But in Queensland, excuse my blood pressure's rising here, but in Queensland, under Labor, a law was created to allow single men and same-sex couples or single women to obtain a child by surrogacy. And that is the government, and presently the LNP presides over this law, and I hope it won't last, but it presides over a law which institutes the motherless family, where one man can obtain a child by surrogacy or two men can obtain a child by surrogacy. And get this, the birth certificate is falsified under Queensland law, so there is no mention of any female. That is the state we are in, and I do hope, respectfully, that the LNP does what it promised and gets rid of Labor's provisions. But that is how bad it is, and in a way that is the same offence against the child, a deliberate, premeditated, adult decision to force it to live without a mother.
Now some people say, well, that happens anyway. I mean, I was raised by a single mum, etc., etc. The difference and the distinction here is that what you're talking about is a matter of government policy, where it's a child being denied a mother or a father not through some unexpected event or some death or something like that, but as a matter of government policy and a premeditated decision.
Look,
that's the distinction.
It really has no bearing. We all have friends, we all have patients, we all have family. Marriages break up, things happen, parents die, tragedies happen. Look, that's life. That's life. And that's just the way it is. But that baby started off with a mother and a father, and the birth certificate has a mother and a father, and there's still a father out there even if he's left, and there's still so on and so on and so on.
Right.
It is something that look, it broke. It was a good thing and it broke or whatever. That's just a tragedy. But as you said, same-sex marriage is a coldly calculated decision of government to create motherless families, create fatherless children. That is very, very bad policy.
Can I ask, David, are there any recognised studies to show that children raised in same-sex marriages are disadvantaged?
Virtually all studies for about 40 years of social science just came to this, almost a big yawn of a conclusion, that obviously children do best in every parameter when they are with married biological parents. That's a given. In the last 10 years, we've had a few very small, rather dodgy, usually motivated by political groups, studies typically of lesbian couples showing that, lo and behold, children of lesbian couples, they do as well or better than the rest of us. Frankly, I don't give a toss. I ask people, you come to me and tell me that because children who were stolen from their Aboriginal parents are doing very, very well at school, are doing terribly well at sport, are nicely integrated and all very happy, therefore no wrong was done by taking them from their mother? Are you trying to tell me that? I don't give a toss what the outcome is particularly. The question is, was an offence committed initially against that child? The child of the Aboriginal mum? And I'm not weighing into the stolen generations thing. I'm saying to the extent that that is true, the offence was committed, regardless of whether they turn into a lawyer or a politician later. And the same thing applies. The offence of same-sex marriage is that we intentionally deprive a little child of their mother. And I don't care how well they turn out in the end, we have harmed the deep inner life of that child.
We've had a couple of questions regarding, because marriage is the union of a man and woman under God, then can't the Christian definition of marriage just be something that Christians do and let society get on and do its own thing? Why do Christians have to keep on? Why don't Christians just keep their definition of marriage and let the secular world just do their thing?
Well, look, of course, the Christian understanding of marriage is layers deep on top of the mere biological model reinforced for social stability. On top of that, we have the whole profound notions of the metaphorical relationship between man and woman and Christ and his church. We have the whole notion of the human Trinity intersecting at Bethlehem with the divine Trinity. We can get really deep and get really high on all that stuff. And that's why Christian marriage is so rich. But you can't just let it go as if it was some cultural little sort of fun thing we do. Marriage is not a religious invention. We enrich it, we do not invent it. It is not even a social invention. It is a natural reality which we neglect at our peril socially. And if you say, oh, what the heck, let society go its way, first of all, you have social breakdown, you have all the consequences of fatherless children, you have all the crime, but you lose the souls of your kids because they will be formed by the schools to think that the sexual behaviour of two men is no different whatsoever to their mum and their dad. None. It is as innocent, as natural, as good as their mum and dad. Now, that is not the case. And I will not have my children or grandchildren taught that it is the case. And if there is a member of the Human Rights Commission here, you can handcuff me now. But that, I'm afraid, is a moral insight that everyone in the world shared until about 5 minutes ago in the decadent West. And I'm not shifting from it.
What's the threat legally for the church? I was interested when Andrew Wilkie put some same-sex marriage legislation before Parliament, and his big boast was that his legislation contained special exemptions for the church, as if religious freedom was an exemption that Andrew Wilkie was able to hand down from on high, rather than as a fundamental primary right. My concern would be what begins as an exemption for churches comes to be seen as a loophole that is being exploited, which eventually is closed. Is there any evidence overseas that that path is already being taken?
Very much so. It makes legal nonsense. If you have anti-discrimination law, you can't have proper or lasting exemptions. They will be tolerated until the market is ready to bear a change, and then it'll change. The European Court of Human Rights heard a case, and they ruled that member states which have legalised homosexual marriage will have to have their churches perform homosexual marriage, or the churches will be guilty of discrimination. That was the view of the European Court of Human Rights. I hope I'm not too inaccurate in that quote. And I mean, you know, in Britain, I think the Church of England now has some exemption from not having to perform same-sex marriages, which became legal in Mother England last month. Wouldn't it break your heart? So that's now happening. But it won't last. It can't. It can't. It's a temporary measure to enable, you know, it's a sugar coating to the pill, so society will swallow it. But it can't last, and it won't. And the intention of the serious thinkers in the homosexual movement is to crush the church with a great big stick of anti-discrimination law, and it will work. And if pastors are not frightened by that, they're not paying attention.
Some of the dilemma I think that as Christians we face is that we are very concerned, and rightly so, to be winning the souls of people, regardless of their sexuality. And you know, Si spoke brilliantly about that the other night, or touched on it. And no matter what someone's sexual orientation, God loves them deeply. Jesus died for them, and they're our brothers and sisters. The concern is how to speak about a political issue without disenfranchising people from the church, which is their hope. And it seems to me to be a very difficult thing to do. And to be honest, I don't know that, well, I think there's fault on both sides. I think the church has been very provocative in some of its language in past times, and has been very unwise, and has unnecessarily alienated people by the way we've spoken. I also think that certain groups have made a political issue deeply and intensely personal, where to disagree about an issue, you are now slighting that person. So for the church, this is a very difficult and delicate issue where we really need God's wisdom.
Absolutely, but this is something the church has to just perfect, the hate the sin, love the sinner. It has to be what it is, which is as loving and utterly accepting and utterly affectionate and supportive as we are of all those gay people that are our friends or our patients or our family or whatever. There's no issue with that. There's none. And those members of the congregation will know that. If they're not getting their message, that is our problem. That is our failing. But, like Jesus saying to the woman caught in adultery, neither do I condemn you. Go and do not sin anymore. The church does not move from its teaching that the only sexual behaviour that is good in God's eyes is the sexual relations of man and wife within marriage. Nothing before, nothing outside, nothing different. And that applies to all of us. All of us. Even us married couples, there was not, it was not an option before, it's not an option outside, it's not an option differently. That is the Christian teaching, and if we're Christians, we're stuck with it, and if we live under it, we'll be blessed by it. But the church must not in any way faint from the teaching, and then it must not in any way fail to embrace and love our brothers and sisters who are afflicted, in my humble opinion, with a sort of emotional torment that you would not wish on your worst enemy. You really wouldn't. I mean, a lot of them come to cope with it and say it's fine. Good on them. I wouldn't disturb them if they're thinking it's fine, as long as they don't then proselytise a sort of activist homosexual agenda in the church. That's not on. But a lot of them just need the love and support to get by. As the great C.S. Lewis said of his friend, who had a friend, Arthur Greaves, who'd been a homosexual all his life, he said of homosexuality, for a Christian, it is simply a cross that you've got to carry. I think that's wise and true. And I think with that clear understanding within our congregations, the unconditional love, the clear teaching, then we can stand in the public square and not talk religious arguments, talk secular, wise, arguments like I hope I've been giving you. I'm sorry if it doesn't work for you, it does work for me. And those are the arguments about the reality of marriage as mother, father, child, the needs of the child rather than the gratification of the adults, and the needs of society to preserve this vital institution. That's all we've got. That's all we've got. But the pastors need to talk among themselves about the consequences for the churches if this legal change happens. It will be a terrible thing.